Hello everyone, I'm Lady Joyful. Welcome back to the Joyful Soul Creates. Today I have a floral cast card to share with you. This is my design team card for the latest Cupcake Inspirations challenge, and we have a colour challenge this week to use orange, teal and white. I'll be using this stamp set which is from Uniko. It's called Pure Florals Cosmos. To start, I'm going to stamp the flower stamp onto a snippet of vellum with the help of my MISTI. I will first treat the vellum with my anti-static powder tool and then stamp with embossing ink, which is a clear sticky ink, and coat with white embossing powder. The anti-static powder tool makes sure that the powder will only stick to the embossing ink and not to anywhere that I don't want it. And whilst I'm doing this, I had my heat tool heating up, so then I'll use that to melt the embossing powder. It's very important to preheat the heat tool because otherwise you could burn the vellum. You don't want to be heating it for very long. And then I'm going to be colouring in the image. I turned the image over because you don't want to colour on top of the embossing, as that can damage the nibs of your markers. As I'm colouring on the back of the vellum, the colours are going to be muted when it's turned over again, so I want to use very bright colours. I did start out with, I tried to blend, which doesn't work too well, so I was adding red for the shadows and yellow for the highlights, but it wasn't blending as well as I would have wanted, so I ended up swapping and just doing a wash of orange all over the back of the flower, so on all the petals, filling them all, and it wasn't quite as intense as I wanted, so I did a second layer as well. And then I'm just using a slightly damp baby wipe to smooth out where it hadn't blended too well on the first petals I'd done. And then I'll fill in the back flower as well, and once all the orange is down, I'll go back in with a bit of red and just pull it out with the orange. It actually blended better this way. The reason I did this was because I wanted my back flower to be darker. Being further away it would appear darker. And then I added some yellow and blended it with the orange in the same way on the front petals, as these would be lighter. I then filled in the centre of the black flower with the orange and the centre of the front flower with the yellow. And I used my darkest blue-green marker to create a teal look on the stems. Now, vellum is notorious for being very difficult to adhere, or well, not difficult, but tricky, I suppose, because the adhesive shows through. The way I got around this was by covering the whole of the back of the flower with double-sided tape, and as the whole thing is covered you can't see the edges of the adhesive, so it's invisible. Just making sure it's properly stuck down to the vellum, and I will cut it off the roll, and then I will take my scissors and I will fussy cut around the stamp. I'm cutting right up against the edge of the embossing. The trick to fussy cutting is you want to turn the paper, not your scissors. That's the best way to get a smooth line. My scissors aren't anything special, but I just had to heat some of the powder. I noticed it hadn't set. Luckily it hadn't rubbed off whilst I was colouring. And then for the area between the stems, I obviously couldn't get my scissors in there, so I'm using my craft knife. I had to work at it a bit because the thickness of the backing paper for the double-sided tape made it very difficult to cut through. Just going over it a few times to make sure it's properly cut away and taking that out. I actually took some of the edge of the embossing off, but it's not too obvious because it will be white on white when it's on the card, so I decided it didn't matter. I'm using a top fold card today. I usually use side fold, but I decided to go for top fold this time. and I am placing my flowers on the card, not sticking them down yet, just using them as a guide so that I know where to stamp my sentiment. And I'm using Altenew Lagoon ink, which is a nice teal ink which goes well with the teal I'd used on the flowers. I stamped it on some scrap paper to make sure the position was right, and then stamped it on the front of the card base, directly on the card base. And now I need to carefully remove the backing paper from my flowers and adhere them into place. This tape is very sticky, so I only really have one chance to get it where I want it. And that completes the front of the card. I decided then that I also wanted to decorate the inside of the card as well. I don't often do this, but I wanted to this time, so I pulled out another sentiment from the same Uniko stamp set, as well as a flower. I'm just lining them up how I want them and using the grid lines on the MISTI door to make sure that I have the sentiment completely straight. Being a very long sentiment, it's a bit difficult. It kept wanting to bend in the middle a bit. But I got it there eventually, and then I'm using the same Lagoon ink to stamp the sentiment so that it matches the front nicely, again checking the position with some scrap paper. And for the flower I will bring in some Spice Marmalade Distress ink to match the orange, bring some more of the orange from the front. Distress inks, regular distress inks aren't the best for stamping, but it's not a solid image, so it worked fine. And that's the completed card. I do hope you'll join us for this week's Cupcake Inspiration Challenge. I'll put a link to it in the description box below, as well as over on my blog. This week we are sponsored by Inspired by Stamping, who are providing a $15 gift card or gift certificate to one lucky winner. Thank you for watching, and I hope to see you again soon. Bye!